Hey there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another how to draw video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to draw people holding hands, really just the hands themselves. It's been quite a while since I did a video focusing on hands, so let's go ahead and get started with a few basic guidelines. Alright, now it might be a little tricky to see what this is supposed to be. It's eventually going to be this top part of the front hand. And people do often ask what size I'm working at. So this one is 2¼ inches, that one line, which comes out to around 5½, maybe a little more than 5½ centimeters. And then over here, this one almost 1½ inches, a little under 1½ inches, comes out to around 3½ centimeters. But really, you don't have to work at the same size I do. You could draw this larger, smaller. Just focus on this shape and do your best to replicate it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add some extra guidelines down here that will eventually help us draw the fingers. Alright, so you can see I just sort of extended this line on this side. This one also extended, but maybe, curving inward just a bit. And this line follows roughly parallel, although it's widening out, and it seems to me a little straighter compared to this line up here. Pay attention to the proportions. I'd say this is about 1/4 of the distance as going across this shape right here now. It's time for us to divide this into four spaces, four different areas for the fingers. So when I'm drawing fingers, I always begin by drawing a center line that separates the two sections. Now, in this particular case, this one is just a little larger, I think, from side to side. And then notice the angle, a little diagonal here. And before, having done that, I think it's easier to get equal distances between these two remaining lines. Now later on I'm going to refine these further so that they look more like actual individual fingers. But the basic thing to pay attention to at this point is the direction of these lines. They are sort of fanning out a little, and the angle on this line is considerably different from the angle on the other two. Well, I'm going to add just one basic guideline for the thumb, and then we can move on to drawing the other hand. So you can see this line breaks into three different parts, and note the angle. Like the first angle here is just a slight angle, maybe a little stronger angle here, and then the distance of the lines, I'd say it really kind of breaks into thirds. Maybe this last third is the smallest of the three. Now normally I would draw the entire thumb, but this part is going to be obscured by the fingers of the other hand. So I've kind of taken it to around here, and I'm just letting that trail off. You're seeing the thumb a little bit from the side, and that's why you get that sort of shape right there. In fact, I wouldn't say a little bit. It truly is almost exactly from the side. What are you talking about, man? Just get on to the next part of the video. So let's, I did want to get on to drawing the other hand, but I think we should get the line to the wrist in place. Alright, so this line is more or less an extension of that first line that we put in, and this one just a very slight change of angle there from the gentle curve of the other side of the hand. Well, let's go ahead then and get on to drawing some basic guidelines for the fingers of the other hand. Alright, so this is kind of an interesting shape here. If you pay attention to the this curving line and that first line that we put down ages ago, it seems like, then that'll help you get that line in place. And this is really going to create this nice, hopefully elegant looking shape of the four fingers curving around as they hold hands. Notice that this tip here comes just a little bit past that initial line. One of the fingernails eventually will be right there. Very slight bend here in this line for one of the knuckles eventually we're going to see. And notice how straight this line is before curving off in a way that's pretty parallel to that initial line. Well, sadly we're going to have to erase some of these guidelines here. I'm just going to grab a kneaded eraser here. See, I fooled you. I tricked you all into drawing a line that we didn't even need. Actually, I think we did need that line to see where all these other lines go, but yeah, sadly it is time to erase a couple of these initial guidelines before moving on and doing kind of like what we did a minute ago, dividing this first into half. So yeah, I'd say, basically these two sections do seem to be pretty similar in size. Pay attention, though, to the angle of this line and how just after it crosses, that where we used to have that guideline before I so rudely erased it, it gets just a little bit past that and then curves down just to sort of repeat this knuckle, the knuckle action that we have going on over there. Very conveniently, this line ends up reconnecting right at the place where the thumb attaches to that line. So let's go ahead and draw those other two lines that finish off the basic guidelines for the fingers. Okay, so I think you can begin to see how things are coming together here. One thing to notice is how the knuckle of this pinky is really more dramatically angled than the others, which are very gently curved there. And basically that should give you everything you need to know about the fingers until we start refining things later on. Let's go ahead and, here, I'll put in the thumb, an indication of the thumb over here. All right, I figured I'd just go ahead and get the lines of the wrist in place. Notice how this line begins just a little bit south of that line that is really not for the knuckles, believe it or not. It's more just for helping us see where the individual fingers split off from the rest of the hand. And then basically, focus on the width of this. If you want a wider wrist, you'd, of course, just place that line a little further away. And as for the placement of the thumb, it's really coming right around the place where we had that first curve of the line of the other thumb. Well, it's time for us to ask Old Man Time-Lapse to excuse himself. I hope you enjoyed the party, Old Man Time-Lapse, but it's time for you to go. But I'm going to go ahead and begin to refine each one of these subsections into individual fingers. Now, one thing that I noticed as I looked at photographs of people holding hands, and if you do a Google image search, it's not that hard to find a pretty good reference for people holding hands. But one thing that I noticed was that the pinky is very often sort of splitting off in a slightly different direction. I wonder if it's because the pinky just is not so necessary in terms of, maintaining your grip on the hand. But in any case, I'm sort of separating this off here. And I noticed how also that most of the knuckles are, surprisingly flat at the end as they curve around out of sight. But you do want to sort of pay attention to the ends of each knuckle and how they create this sort of step. It's like steps almost from one knuckle to the next. See how they separate off there, and I hope that the the remaining guideline there doesn't get in the way of you seeing. I guess I'll I have to admit my eraser is like almost shot on this pencil, so I'm having to grab another pencil. How's that for professionalism? Just to get rid of that initial guideline. But that you can see that it did help us to figure out where this finger ends, seeing the relationship between all of those knuckles. And then I guess that stepping thing, each one being like a step on a staircase, is a little more gradual as it goes on. But I was sort of struck at how flat and squarish each knuckle seemed at the end. And let's go ahead and switch over to this other eraser, because that initial guideline, as I said, really was just for getting each one of those fingers to, the separation between each finger to line up the way they do in real life. So just erasing that. And here's one of the big things that I noticed in photo reference was that the skin near the pinky very often sort of creates a line that curves off just a bit. Doesn't happen so much with the other fingers, at least in this kind of a pose. Would we call this a pose? Are hands capable of posing? I guess so. In any case, did I talk about how this pinky here sort of separates just a little bit, the contour? Let's just do this again to point it out a little more. I noticed that the contour of the pinky became visible here against the edge of the hand, and so you see it sort of, the line dips just a little. right there. Now later on when I get to the shading part, I am going to begin to indicate knuckles here, but for now let's go ahead and sort of do the same thing over here, taking these very basic guidelines and beginning to refine them into individual fingers. So I'll start down here with the pinky, and of course it looks very sharp and pointy there, and that won't do. We don't want claws gouging into the other hand. So let's go ahead and make this much more curving and gentle. But you know, having that initial curving line can just kind of help you get the fingers to line up properly. Now this, I'll go ahead and get a little bit of an indication here. This pinky knuckle is the one that is most clearly defined from this point of view, and you might want to get a little tiny line back here for like the wrinkling of the flesh as that pinky continues bending back. I'm not going to get into the fingernails quite yet, but let's go ahead and move on to this next one, doing kind of the same thing. And just because of the position of the, you know, I guess the camera angle almost, each one of these digits, phalanges, I can never get the right word, is seen a little bit in profile. So notice how that is pretty straight here and then it curves down. And you're going to kind of get the same thing here. Part of this is, I think, due to the nail, to the fingernail that creates this fairly sharp contour here at the end. But instead of just having them rounded, I'm giving them just a little, they almost come to a bit of a point there. And then this last, the pointer finger here is sort of drawn back at a distance. I think I've said this in my videos on hands. In general, that, you know, the length of the fingers is such that the middle finger is the longest, the pointer and the ring finger drop back down, and then the pinky is rather drastically shorter than those other three fingers. And, oh yeah, let's go ahead and start refining things in terms of the contour of the knuckles. Because this pinky is sort of coming off at a slightly different angle, we get a rather sharp difference, sharp little gap here between the pinky and the other fingers. But actually, over here, at least in the photo that I was looking at, I was struck at how these fingers kind of lined up pretty neatly and remained slightly squarish looking. And I guess I can begin to indicate a little bit where the knuckles end up being, although as I said, this is this will be mainly achieved by way of shading. You know, it's very gentle the way the knuckles show up. You're not like drawing really strong, bold lines, but just to help you see how, because of the differences in the length of each finger, the knuckle area is going to be a little higher up on this one than it is on these two. And you know, the truth is, when we get to shading, these three little marks are going to blend in with the rest of the shading. I suppose I might as well go ahead then and start indicating the fingernails. But before I do that, let me just, in time-lapse, just erase all these remaining guidelines. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start drawing the individual fingernails of this hand. And I was, again, looking at photo reference to find attractive fingernails, unlike mine, that look horrible. But I did notice that at least with like hand models, these people who have very elegant-looking hands, that the area of the cuticle is quite flattened there, you know. But I don't want this to stand out too much, so I'm going to keep that quite light, I think. And then I suppose there are different ways of trimming nails that create different nail shapes. But in the photo reference that I was looking at for what seemed to be, you know, sort of ideal nails, they were trimmed in such a way that they were a little bit flat at the end. So I don't want to go too overboard with that, but I'm making these, I don't know if you can even see, but each one of these comes to a fairly neatly trimmed, slightly flat end. But again, I think I'm going to be, you know, as I go back in and erase away a little bit and refine things, I'm trying not to call too much attention to the nails. I think it's very easy to get a little carried away with over delineating the nails, and they begin to call a little too much attention to themselves. And I think especially in illustration, sometimes it's best to focus a little more on the contour, the shape that the finger makes, rather than calling too much attention to the nails. That's really just a personal preference, though. I'm sure different people have different thoughts in terms of drawing nails. Over here, because of the position of the thumb, you're only going to see just a little bit of the underside of the nail. I think over here you'd see maybe in profile, just the sort of side of the nail. And happily, you don't have to draw the nails at all over here. Woohoo! It's National Don't Draw the Other Nails Day. How awesome. Well, that kind of gets all those lines in place. I suppose I'll go ahead with my black Prismacolor, or my trusty black Prismacolor. Get it right, Mark. I'm going to go in and do sort of final line work before we move on to the shading. Well, that finishes off the outlines, and you'll note that I didn't use the black Prismacolor for any of the fingernails. Like I said earlier, I'm going to try to keep that effect rather subtle. But I want to do as much as I can real-time in terms of the shading here. I'm pulling out my Dixon Ticonderoga and starting to indicate where the knuckles are going to be. Now, one of the interesting things is that, this line, this dividing line of each finger, is quite a ways down compared to where the knuckles actually occur. So I'm placing sort of rounded areas of shading where I saw the knuckles occurring in photo reference. Note that I'm holding the pencil quite low to the page. I'm not going straight down like this. And when I do shading, I get down at a low angle. I don't hold myself down at a low angle. When I do shading, I get down all the way down on the floor. No, I hold the pencil down at a low angle so as to get quite a lot of the lead, surface exposed and laying almost flat. That way you can, rather than getting lines, you start getting shading. But maybe I should try getting myself down at an angle. Why not? In any case, adding in the shading here, this is really figuring out the locations of the knuckles, and then once I know that, I can begin to extend that shading down, all the way down the fingers. Because of the lighting situation that I imagine with, the light coming from above, all of these fingers are going to be, and I'll just do this really quickly and refine my shading later on. This is like markcrilley time-lapse. Moving as quickly as I can time-lapse. How about that? Just to show you where I intend to put the shading. Boy, that's coming out darker than I want it to right there. Sorry, folks, I need to erase away. Sometimes irregularities in the paper or indeed in the lead can result in the shading coming out darker than you intended. But, once I've figured out, and I'm sort of thinking that actually the knuckles are even further removed from those lines, so I'm going to kind of try to push this one back just a bit more. And maybe get a little shading between the knuckles, which I don't even know is accurate to photographs. But sometimes you find that you have to sort of cheat reality in a way in your illustrations, especially with hands. I find you have to give them more. You don't have to, but illustrators often give them more definition, sharper angles than they actually have in real life, because otherwise they just get this sort of potato-like amorphous blob sort of look to them, so you're sort of almost forced to define things a little more. Anyway, that gives you the basic idea of where I intend to put the knuckles. I'm probably going to go back in here and darken in the shading near each one of these lines that divide the fingers, just to sort of deepen that. And sadly it's impossible for me to do this entire thing real time, but let's go ahead and start working on the backhand. I'm working on my backhand. Little tennis joke there for you who enjoy the sport. In any case, adding quite a bit of shading down here at the pinky. And because of the angle of the pinky of this hand, this is the one that really gets all the shading. And down here, there's maybe a suggestion of the deep shadow that occurs on the other side of those fingers. But what I'm going to go for is sort of a mid-tone shade on each one of these parts of the finger, just below where I had put the shading of the knuckles. And just make it a little lighter. It's not going to be... By the end of it, you're going to see that this remains rather light, whereas this area, I'm going to work more into it and get this darker and darker by comparison. This is sort of like just lightly shaded. But I figure this thumb down here is going to get quite a lot of shadow, so I may even go right now and sort of boldly darken that in. And in terms of light source, I imagine there's going to be a bit of shading down here on this side of the wrist. Certainly down here on the other side of the thumb, that's on the back there behind. We can get some shading in there. This is, sort of temporary, unrefined shading that I'm just dropping in here to give you a sense of where I imagine shadows to be. And I can go in later and make this look better. Sometimes you might see a little bit of the tendons on the wrist in this position, so I might sort of indicate that a little bit. And that maybe gives you the idea of where I would want to put shading. Like I said, I'm not going to get too much into the fingernails. Maybe get a hint at them a little bit with extra shading in that area, but yeah, I just don't... It's a personal preference. I don't want to call too much attention. But maybe we should get some drop shadows off of these fingers that make them look a little more, connected to the, that they are pressing the flesh, so to speak, beneath them. And maybe that's enough of that in real time. I'm going to go ahead and kick it into time-lapse to finish off the shading of both hands. Alright, well, this drawing is essentially done, but I want to do one last thing that's not so much related to, teaching about drawing hands. It's more just a little effect that you can add to an illustration like this to make it pop a little more. So I'm going to begin by drawing a rectangle, the lines of a rectangle back behind the hands. So now I'm going to take out this touch marker from Sheehan Art, but really any black marker should work for the kind of effect that I'm going to do here. And really I'm just going in with the broad tip and blackening in this entire rectangle. And in the end we will find that it helps the hands to sort of pop forward, and the contrast should hopefully make this a more striking illustration. Well, no need to do this in real time. I'm going to go ahead and invite Old Man Time-Lapse back to the party to help me finish off this illustration. So you can see by adding the simple black background, it really makes quite a big difference in terms of, making the illustration easier to see from a distance, just adding a bit more drama to it. And that's a little trick that you can use, not just for a drawing of hands, but any number of illustrations that you think this technique could benefit. But let me go ahead and thank anyone who has supported me by getting any of my books like Brody's Ghost and Miki Falls, my 2 graphic novel series, as well as Mastering Manga and Mastering Manga 2, and coming out May 5th, the Realism Challenge. Hey, if you missed the video that I did on Tuesday earlier this week, I'm going to put a link in the info box because it tells you all about this special offer of a free autographed print provided you pre-order the Realism Challenge and go to a certain website. Go ahead and check that out if you missed it, because I think there is still time to snag one of those prints if you would like to have one. But let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.